Hi, everybody. Welcome to the IC chat. Today is April 24th, 2025. I am not Matt Feldman. I am Ann Price. But we are here to hear MJ Pattison give us a couple of book reviews. So, MJ, take it away.
Okay. Um, Thank you. So the only thing I need to still figure out is just how to put the participants in a different place. Hold on just a minute. Okay, well, I think I can do this pretty well. So I'm MJ Pattison, and I do business as Chatham Evaluation in Chatham, Massachusetts, which is on Cape Cod. I'm a company of one and a generalist relative to content. I've worked with people in public health and in public education and with several not-for-profits, in especially literacy and sort of social service kinds of settings. Um, so that's me. And what I'd like to do today, there's no expectation that you've read these books, but I've been involved with this group for about a couple of years, since 2022. And a couple times people have done book reviews of books that they've found helpful in their practice. And thought these two books were useful. And so I thought I would just share a little bit about them so you can decide whether or not you want to read them. I also think they're useful to read together or to use together because they both take slightly different approaches to how to have about the qualities that either enable or interfere with fruitful conversation. So today's goals, I'm hoping to briefly summarize the content and the structure of these two communication resources, suggest ways that they might be useful in your practice, and then leave most of the time for sort of general feedback and dialogue about recent successes and challenges, communicating when difficult topics emerge in your work. So, this is why I think it's useful to read these two books together. And this is a little bit of a generalization and a little bit of sort of trying to categorize things, since that's what evaluators do. They say, this is about this and this is about that. But both books talk about both things. But in general, Supercommunicator is externally focused. And what I mean by that is it's structured around case studies. He uses sort of tells a story and then looks at the social science research that story illustrates. And the focus is about reading the room and he talks some about media messaging. And his primary concern is and question is what's happening out there? What's happening amongst the people that you're talking to? And then Crucial Conversations is internally focused. So it's a skill-based, the approach is more like coaching. And he works on short illustrations and reflection questions, and skill building is more the control. And the question that this book addresses is more what's going on in me that I can control. So let's start with Supercommunicator. So this book is by Charles Duhigg. He's a journalist, and he's a writes nonfiction books, but has worked for the New York Times, worked for so he's a really good writer, and it's fun to read him, which is a nice thing about that. And what he does is he breaks his chapters into really three categories about what kind of conversation you're having. So he has really three kinds of conversations that he's identified. One is a negotiation conversation about something. This is a conversation that's about something, and the goal is to get to consensus or to get to some kind of action. And then he has a story that illustrates that kind of conversation. In this case, the story is a jury trial of somebody where the person they're talking about clearly committed the crime, but there are extenuating issues, and this group has to decide on an appropriate sentence or an appropriate response to a situation where the guilt of the individual is not in question, but the circumstances that created the situation are complicated. So it's a difficult conversation, and it's difficult to get to consensus. So that's that kind of conversation. And then the way the book is structured is that there's this theme that he presents, there's a story that illustrates the theme, and then there's a guide where he makes some very concrete suggestions about how to put this in practice. And then the second kind of conversation is a how do we feel conversation. So this is about how people feel. So it's about emotions, and it's about it's sometimes you think you're having one kind of conversation, and then you suddenly discover that actually you're having quite an emotional conversation, and that when that happens, it's important to recognize that and to kind of um, pivot to that sort of thing. And the two stories that illustrate this, or two of the stories, are about the creation of the TV sitcom The Big Bang Theory, which is, I gather, I haven't watched it, but I gather that from the description, it's about very brilliant people who have very difficult time communicating or understanding emotional content and emotional interactions. And they had a lot of false starts because it was very difficult to communicate and make these characters empathetic and interesting because they couldn't, the whole point of them was they couldn't communicate emotional content. And then the other illustration is how do you have a conversation about a very emotional topic where there's high levels of disagreement? So, and the other thing that he has in this section, see if I can get to my notes here because it's hard for me to see them. He has a guidelines around how to talk online. Oops, I just went too fast here. So let's just move back up a second. Um, so the one problem here is that I can't see my notes. Okay, here we go. Um, he has some really interesting suggestions about online conversations. He points out that we've been communicating with each other for a million years, but that conversations online are in their infancy, and that the biggest problem with this, and we've all noticed this, is that online and social media conversations remove nonverbal cues, so voices, gestures, expressions, the kinds of things that in a conversation would cause us to naturally edit or respond differently are gone, so that what ends up happening is things can easily be misread and misunderstood. And he has four guidelines, which I want to present. And then when we get to the discussion part, I'd be interested in, what you think of these ideas. He says, overemphasize politeness in an online exchange, underemphasize sarcasm, express gratitude, deference, greetings, apologies, and hedges. Things like "I wonder" or "I think maybe," and then avoid criticism in a public forum. Then the other thing that I found interesting and useful from an evaluation perspective is that for all of these stories, he weaves social science research throughout the story. So the third kind of conversation is an identity conversation. Who are we? And this is a situation where again, you might think you're talking about something, but suddenly who somebody is, their own personal story, their culture, and background become, will impact the way the conversation happens. And these conversations are particularly difficult and if you don't know you're having that kind of conversation, misunderstandings happen very, very quickly. And again, the illustration in this is about a company culture. These guys are all from kind of a business background, so a lot of the illustrations are from that. The story is about Netflix evidently started out with a very open approach to communicating. Say whatever you think, don't edit. We need to critique each other. We need to be hard hitting. We need to be sure that we are telling it like it is, and that'll make our product better, that we won't be pussyfooting around. But in the course of that, somebody did step over a line that created a problem where people's identities were impacted, and suddenly they were in a whole different world. It's an interesting story to read. And the guide here is suggestions about how to make a hard conversation where identity is crucial safer, because safety is the most important thing. That the Netflix situation became unsafe for some of the people there, and as a result, it was no longer an effective means of conversation. So those are the three kinds of conversation and the way he structured his book. What's the conversation about? How do we feel? Or who are we? Are the three kinds of conversations and usually one of them is primary, although they can contain all three elements. So he has four rules for a learning conversation, which is what's defined as a constructive, useful conversation. One is to pay attention to what's happening, what kind of conversation you're having. Share goals, but ask other people what their goals are. Ask about feelings and share your own feelings. And explore identities, it can often be important to a discussion. that will make it that will explain or will help people understand different perspectives. So the second book is about it's called Crucial Conversations, and this is a skill-based. This is a whole different approach. His approach is more internally focused, and it's sort of skill-based. And coaching, reflection questions, and short illustrations are the way the book is structured. And the what's going on with me, inside me, and what can I control is the focus. And for this book, I would suggest you go directly to page 259. Don't read the book from cover to cover because he has this wonderful chart that lists every chapter under the principle. So the chapter headings are the principles that he's going to talk about. And then he has the skill that that chapter deals with. And then the question, the communication question that that skill will help get at. So, for example, chapter 3 is choose your topic. I have a tendency, I'm a process person, to start talking about something. And when I'm doing this to my husband, he'll say, headline says he doesn't know. I know what I'm talking about, but I haven't, like, there's no topic sentence. So, and that's actually a helpful thing to say. So, headline, what are we talking about? And then I tell him the headline. I tell him where I'm going. We're talking about our trip next week. Okay. And then I can go back and talk about what I want to pack or whatever I started on, or that we need to go to the bank or whatever. But this is unbundling. That's an example of unbundling and simplifying, so that people know what you're talking about. I really like the whole concept that we tell clever stories about ourselves or about other people, and that they tend to fall into these three types of stories, the victim or villain or helpless stories. And I like the question, what are you pretending not to know about a problem in order to maintain this clever story, as he describes it? I like that. I thought that was pretty interesting. I picked out this is actually a longer chart. It's like he does every chapter. I just picked out some chapters that I particularly liked. I also thought the whole recognizing that the two under stress people tend to go either to violence, not physical violence necessarily, but an aggressive approach stance, or they shut down. They're silent. And are you doing that? Are other people doing that? Did the meeting suddenly go silent? What's going on? And then, the other things are pretty straightforward. Chapter 9 is about mirroring things, making sure, repeating back to people what they've said to make sure you've understood it, not in exact words, but like reframing. And then moving to action. It's important to have make a decision, decide who's going to do what and how to follow up, and especially in a what's this about kind of meeting. So. So again, 259, and here's a couple of quotes from Crucial Conversations that I thought were pithy. Praise should be a common denominator, especially in an accountability conversation. If you've built a safe and trusting relationship, an accountability conversation will go better. I mean, there's a fair amount of discussion about conversations between people who have different elements of power. The measure of whether a conversation is safe, I love this, is not how comfortable I feel, but whether meaning is flowing. Whether meaning is flowing. And then the other one is the sooner you notice that you're not in dialogue, the easier and the lower cost it is to get back. And the corollary is the longer that it takes you to notice that you're not in dialogue, the harder it is to get back and the higher the cost. So I did Matt's 5.5 ways that this might be useful. I reiterate that it's not necessary to read these books from cover to cover, front to back. Pick a chapter and dig in, and then put it down and pick another chapter and dig in. And then all the communication skills in the world won't help you if you're having different conversations. If one person's having a what's this about conversation and someone else is having an emotional conversation, say you're trying to decide whether to sell the family cottage, that's it's not going to go well. And conversely, if you identify the conversation, but it won't help to have all the strategies in the world. Wait, if you can figure out what conversation you're having, but if you don't know how to talk about that, it won't help you. And then to be alert to the signs that a conversation has changed, that you thought you were having one conversation and now it's become a different kind of conversation. And then I also thought pay attention to the Duhigg skill at weaving a story and research, social science research together. It was instructive and helpful as a storytelling strategy and program evaluation. And then finally, to be prepared and self-aware is key. We can't always be, but if there's an opportunity to prepare for a conversation, it's likely to go better. And then these are what I thought we could talk about, and I'll put these in the chat once I've closed out my slides. Consider sharing a recent crucial conversation you had. What kind do you think it was? And you can use the supercommunicator construct is what's this about? What am I feeling or who am I? Or the crucial conversations construct is content, process, or relationship. How did you approach it? How did it go? We could share some stories like that. Was there a time when a crucial conversation changed the story that you'd been telling yourself about the situation, that you thought one thing was happening, but after a conversation you realized something was different? And then I always wonder whether these kinds of interactions can really be taught, or are we hardwired to respond in certain situations in predictable ways, and really what we're after is understanding what we're likely to do and being prepared for it. So those are the three sort of framing discussions that I thought we could share, or anything else you want to talk about. That's all I got. Thank you very much, and I will stop sharing my screens.